Hey, yo, it's me, Pop Fan Marmalade, and you're watching the Comics-Related Madness Network. Huh? So come get some. CromCon. CromCon.
Hey, we want to shout out to our sponsors, Daytona Beach Comic Con. If you are a fan of comic books, if you're a fan of comic book conventions, and if you like meeting comic book creators and getting comics and comic-related stuff, then you need to make your plans to attend Daytona Beach Comic Con. This year's show is September 9th and 10th. Silverline will be there, so you should make your plans to be there too. We'll see you there. If you like comics and find yourself in the Orlando, Florida area, doesn't everyone come to Orlando at some point in time to see the House of Mouse? But when you're here, you need to make it a point to visit Coliseum of Comics, especially the one on East Colonial Drive. They carry Silverline comics, even a limited edition Coliseum of Comics version of our comics. So, when you go, be sure to ask for Silverline Comics and tell them we sent you. OCD stands for Orlando Collector Deviants. OCD, Steve and Trish, they're a family of geeks who promote geek things, particularly those around the Orlando, Florida area. They're big supporters of Silverline, and we think you should be supporters of theirs too. Go give them some love. If you are an independent comic book maker and you need to get your independent comics made, you need to look no further than Kablam! Kablam Digital Printing. They print our books, and they do a bang-up job. They're not only trusted by Silverline, but many, many independent comic book makers. Head on over to kablam.com and see for yourself just how easy it is to have your comic printed by them. And tell them Silverline sent you.
Hi, this is Tim TK, host of That Silverline Show on Tuesday. Join us at 11 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Pacific every Tuesday night as we discuss pop culture and the joys of making comics.
Hi, I'm Barb Kelber, co-host of Silverline's Wednesday Wham. Join us each Wednesday night as we discuss comics, literature, movies, and anything else that may catch our attention.
I'm Roland Mann, and I host Silverline's Silver Sunday. Join me every Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern as we make mine Silverline.
Hello, Internet. Welcome to That's the One Show on Tuesday. I'm your host, Tim TK, joined as always by David Rios.
Hello.
And we're also joined again by Javier Lugo.
Hey, good evening, everybody.
And Javier's also drawing for us tonight, so we'll be watching that as the show goes on. Let me actually probably do this here, so that way more detail on that. Make it a little easier to see.
There you go. You can take my face out. It's fine. Nobody needs to see me. Just the arts.
Sure. If I could get my life with people only interacting with my words and not me having to sell them, that'd be great.
All right.
Anyway, tonight we're talking about creating war comics. For those of you who have been following Silverline, I am the writer and creator of Wolf Hunter, a World War II spy war comic. And of course, you could argue that war comics have been in the industry since the start. Arguably, Captain America started out as one. Although, kind of something of a propaganda piece, trying to get people interested in being heroes and fighting in the European front. Tonight, we're going to be talking about all the considerations you need to make if you're going to handle the topic of war in a comic, historical or otherwise. Writing about science fiction wars is also a passion of mine. So that's what we'll be talking about. However, before we get into that, do our usual icebreaker, and we'll start with Javier. This last week, what have you been doing to... excuse me, brain got a little toasty there. What have you either been reading, watching, or playing? What has been your media intake this week?
Okay, well, this week I've been watching on Netflix this TV series called School Spirits.
Okay.
That's been entertaining. I've been watching that with my 19-year-old daughter, and that's been a lot of fun trying to figure out who killed the girl. And it turns out spoilers. I mean, this thing came out in 2023. She's not dead. She's just been possessed. And,
Sure.
second, I don't know if a second season is coming out, but it was really entertaining. I've also, of course, did my standard run to the comic book shop. I got Chitara #1 sketch cover so I can draw her and from the Thundercats. And and otherwise I've been working on an 11-page horror story for an anthology book coming out from Fierce Comics called, it's spelled HEARSE, Hirsch Lord, Load of Horror. So yeah, I've had to design a robot that, it starts off really innocently and then ends up, eating the world. It's weird, but it's right up my alley. So it was a lot of fun to do. It's 11 pages. I've penciled and inked about 4 pages, and I got another 6 to go. So, and of course I'm behind schedule on that. So yeah, fun.
Okay. David, what have you been either reading, watching, or playing this week?
Haven't been playing anything. Watching, I just finished the Acolyte earlier today, and actually, surprisingly, I've been kind of checking out some of the Monkey Kid stuff.
Okay.
So I think it's great. I think that it's awesome that Sean Shamel is. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing it right. If I'm not, I apologize. But Goku from Dragon Ball is the voice of the Monkey King.
Yeah.
And then you also have Stephen Bloom.
Yeah.
Is the voice of the Demon Bull. So very cool. Just it's very, for anybody who hasn't seen it, is very much distorted, and the traditional anime with completely over the top, exaggerated expressions, and oh my god. So that's been kind of interesting. Reading wise, just some of the stuff for the week, some of the Marvel's Image. I'm waiting this week. I should be getting my Kalis from the comic store.
Nice.
And then also some of the old the X of Swords stuff. So just kind of hitting things here, just stuff here and there. Go out to it's great having some of the stuff on my Kindle when I go out, and we go out to eat, and I sit there and while I'm waiting for a table or waiting for the food to drop off, kind of read through that. My wife's kind of similar. She's she's using her Kindle, reading her books. So
I'm unfortunately now completely digital as well. Our friendly local neighborhood comic store unfortunately just closed down a few months ago. The owner passed away kind of suddenly, and that was the only actual comic shop in our Tri-City area. we have bookstores and hobby stores that'll sell collections if they come in secondhand, but nothing that actually orders in new runs.
Yeah, there's some good online ones, the stores I go to. They also do online orders and stuff like that, and ship throughout the country too. So those are other options as well.
Yeah. I mean, if they're ones that they're really passionate about, then usually I'll go to the publisher website or even Amazon and place a pre-order for the series that's coming out in trades.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Rory said he just watched Ministry of Ungentle Warfare, which I've been wanting to watch. It's the new Henry Cavill movie about the same office that I wrote Wolf Hunter about. Churchill Secret Army.
Is that's also the one that has Alan Richardson in it, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm also hoping to catch that movie soon. What's going, y'all? We're doing pretty well. So thanks for drinking. Hopefully everyone else is doing well at home. My week, I've been doing more watching than anything else. I haven't read anything. It's kind of been a go week, so I haven't really had time to sit down with a book or a comic. I probably needed to just sit down with something on my phone and read it while I'm waiting in my office. But I've been watching. I finally started Castlevania Nocturne.
Okay.
That's really good. But the main watch that we just finished up was a new anime called Rising Impact. It came to Netflix on June 22nd. We just finished the first season. The second season comes out in August. They don't know if they're going to do anything beyond that. But it's a golf anime where it does the similar thing to anyone who's watched Blue Lock, where it just seems like it's normal golf for a while, and then halfway through they just introduce superpowers without any context, no explanation, no lead up.
Nice.
And then it just gets more and more unhinged, and I really appreciate how they can build on being unhinged. But being a golfer who's starved for exciting content about my sport, now that I've kind of moved away from competing in boxing to doing boxing more as just a cardio exercise. But still playing golf tournaments, getting good golf content out there. And now I have so many ideas for a golf comic. Game wise, I have been playing Star Wars Hunters. Not much of like a narrative experience there, but in terms of visuals, really well done visuals. Art style is very cohesive, as well as eye grabbing. It's a hero shooter set in the Star Wars universe. So it plays at something like an Overwatch or Apex Legends or Gun Evo, but it's designed to be playable on your phone as a free-to-play game. So if you like shooter games and like Star Wars and want something to play on your lunch breaks, I highly recommend it.
There you go.
Yeah, I got it on my Switch. So moving into the ranked mode, I definitely feel like Switch has a little bit of advantage over the phone players, which I will exploit to the end of the earth. But yeah, it's a fun game.
That reminds me, there was another thing that I watched one night. I finally got around to watching at least the first part of Rebel Moon.
Oh yeah, was it Zack Snyder's not Star Wars?
Very,
Yeah,
almost not quite.
yeah.
Almost not quite Star Wars.
The legally distinct.
Haven't got around to the second part yet, though.
Okay.
It's
I
worse.
had collected or picked up the Blood Axe ones, so I'll probably check those out too. I mean, it was interesting. There's a lot worse things out there. I mean, I found it kind of interesting, but it was different. So
Okay.
Yeah, Rebel Moon was kind of entertaining. If you just turn off your brain and just have a good time, you'll enjoy it.
Yeah.
I mean, as soon as you apply any kind of logic to it, it just goes off the rails. But just check your mind at the door, get some popcorn, and smile like a kid. You should be able to enjoy it.
Yeah. Yeah, Cliff in chat said, I've never seen a golf comic, but have seen a tennis comic. Yeah, I mean, that's the if you can really nail down the visual language of whatever you're trying to adapt and then make it exciting, you can make anything work as long as you have kind of a cohesive language throughout. Or in the case of Rising Impact, suddenly break your cohesiveness in a way that is so extreme that you have no choice but to follow along. But we'll make sports comics another topic later on. I feel like there's a lot we can talk about there. Tonight we're going to be talking about war comics. So I've already kind of stated my experience there, and we'll probably get more to that as we go throughout the show. But this time we'll start with David. David, what has been your experience with war comics, either creating or reading, or just admiring covers?
Creating, not really that much. Even when I was doing the Marvel stuff, at the time there wasn't a whole lot of actual war comics being put out at that time. But one of the ones that I have been checking out that I actually found was pretty interesting was the current Get Fury book.
Okay.
I've actually been enjoying that. The idea of Nick Fury being captured and then Frank Castle being sent in to initially terminate him because they don't want him being questioned, but then throwing Frank Castle's spin on it before the whole becoming the Punisher and wanting to just kill everybody thing was interesting twist. So I am enjoying that one. I never really I don't think I've ever really read any of the Sergeant Fury and the Howling Commandos or any of those ones. I'm a little interested to see some of the stuff like the Authority. I never read that either, but that's a little more interesting, particularly with the influx that they're going to be doing with the DC Universe and the DCU. So, but yeah, other side thing is I do enjoy some of the period piece stuff. So
yeah,
I did really enjoy the original, Captain America movie where, it had that time period and had a lot of the, themes and stuff. So.
Okay. Javier, what has been sort of your experience with war comics and such?
Well, I haven't got an opportunity to actually draw war comics, but some of the stuff that I think falls under that category that I've read is Sergeant Rock is something I used to catch back in the day whenever I could. I got this companion with Joe Kubert on art and Russ Heath, tremendous draftsman and specialist in World War II stuff. Herb Trimp was also another artist that was really good drawing airplanes and such. It was really into that. And then modern interpretations like Negation from CrossGen, I think qualifies. And I got this trade paperback about 2 years ago. And while it's not a war comic, it is about a post-war world. And I kind of like that. And I was lucky enough to never personally participate in armed conflicts or my close family members. So I don't have a, anti-war stance or pro-war stance. But comics, it's escapism. And this stuff, at least the writers of the time were really good about showing us morality lessons through these war comics. War is hell and all these other things. So,
yeah, I feel like kind of like that. I think very rarely are you going to find, unless it is like some of the classic pieces where. Things that came out like 1939 onwards. You're not really going to find too many war comics or war stories themselves that are like truly pro or anti-war, but they might be more so dealing with the issues that soldiers themselves have to deal with and kind of understanding of these people are asked to do stuff that no other person in life should really be asked to do. And how do you live with that? And what does that mean for you as a person going forward? I just got a chat here. What's your view on Atlas Comics' Blazing Battle Tales? How you recommend the comic and the channel? Nice. Okay. I'll give it a check out. But yeah, as I said, I wrote and created Wolf Hunter, which is a World War II spy comic and deals with elements of the Battle of Britain as well as the Ministry of Special Operations and how they essentially formalized espionage and counter-espionage in a modern sense. So that's my experience creating it. Reading stuff, it's always been like, it's never been like my main read, but I feel like I've always had an interest in that kind of storytelling, either historical or fictional. Speaking as of like pieces of science fiction that try to get really down gritty with what war would look like, as well as alternate history takes on war, and using that as a way to convey some sort of message throughout. So it's something that's been kind of in my repertoire of reading as long as I've been reading, but also something that I've had an interest in creating. There we go. We have a question here. We'll use this to segue into, I guess, the first topic will be doing the Art for War comic, which is appropriate as we do have a colorist and an artist here. Rory asks, Tim, how do you select the art? Did you test multiple artists? So I didn't. My art was pitched to me through my editor, Roland. And I don't know I think there's one or two people that I rejected, but for the most part, I gave them a thorough review, but I was looking more so at people who had an eye for detail, given how specific some elements of the story were going to be. Is especially dealing with World War II. If you get one little detail wrong, people are going to be up in arms in the comments. So
point, yeah.
The illustrator for issue 1, Eiji Caseta, was chosen because he had worked on the Army field manuals and knew how to draw engines and an eye for specific types of planes as well as vehicles. Was looking to work on that kind of stuff. Going into issues 2 and 3, we looked more for an artist who was good at drawing people and expressions and doing like personal scenes and making them dynamic. Because when you enter into essentially the part of the story that follows the same lines as like Tinker Tailor or Soldier Spy, where you have multiple people in one room just kind of staring at each other, asking people questions, you have to work to make that visually appealing. Otherwise, it's just going to be a bunch of talking heads. So we were looking at people's ability not to still deal with like the more technical elements on there, but people who were really good at making those in interrogation scenes much more visually appealing.
Gotcha.
The colorist was pretty easy on. We just one of the first people to submit to color was Martin Bertonen, who is also a fan of Euro comics, and that was kind of what I wanted to do as far as color palette wise, was kind of the pastel and distilled colors you would find in a Euro comic. So it's a easy pick up there, and immediately in sync on how I wanted to use colors to express emotions. So I kind of talked at length here. So now I'll pass it on to Javier or David. When it comes to your respective jobs, when you're dealing with the subject of war, we'll start with it. Stay with the historical for now. What are some considerations you think you would have to make as an artist going into that kind of work, or if you are reading that kind of book, what are some details in the art that you're looking for?
Well, as an artist, as a visual artist, I'm always trying to avoid anachronisms, things that don't belong. If the story takes place in 1962, like the story I did where it takes place in Vietnam, I got to get the uniforms right, the gear right, the helicopters, the airplanes, the VCs, and the jungle. It can't look like any jungle anywhere. It has to be, appropriate for that, setting. Um, I also had to do a lot of research into Hanoi because I had a scene that takes place there. So I had to figure out how they, just the architecture, the cars of the time. So yeah, visual reference is very important to me. All it takes is one thing that looks out of place, and I lost the reader. And I certainly don't want to do that. Not on a 32-page first issue.
Yeah, I agree. I get kind of nitpicky about that myself. I think I was watching. I was just one movie, and they were referencing a particular car, and they made a point about this particular car, and they're like, yeah, well, we got this 1965 Mustang, and I'm looking, and it's very minimal, but I'm looking at it going, that's a 1966 Mustang, because I know the subtleties because I have one. So it's like, I get exactly what you're talking about. When you see the things, when you're looking at a period, for example, that's, like early 60s, and then they introduce a vehicle that was, came out in 1969 or something like that. A lot of the people that go through, and particularly when you're dealing with either war stuff or time period pieces in general, typically the fans that you get of that are the fans that really tend to know their stuff and focus on it. So things like that stand out. And I know it's kind of a big thing. When we had Barb on here last week, she was, clarifying, the weapon, this is the weapon that's firing, and that, and it just kind of goes to the thing where you see a lot of artists that they want to go through and they want, to put a gun that looks like a gun. So, in Wolf Hunter, I saw, had some Lugers and stuff like that. So, getting those not only to look correct, and, that just adds more to the time period piece, the clothing, the vehicles and the settings. And like you said, if you're, the last thing you want to do is have something that's dealing with the Vietnam War and you're putting Japanese or Chinese, architecture in the back, So, establishing those pieces, really goes through and does that authenticity to it to bring the reader in more. And as far as color palettes and things like that is, the stuff that I would be looking more at is a lot of the toned down, not super bright, you're definitely not really going to be throwing a lot of purples and stuff like that. You're going to be doing a lot of, your olive drabs, your tans, even your scenes. If you're talking about people being deployed in the field, you're going to want to tend to gray out, and murk a lot of that to kind of bring that feeling color-wise on that, because most of those period pieces, there was a lot of hardship and a lot of, days after days after days being wet and cold and just miserable. So portraying that, in the art style, portraying that in the coloring and all that stuff just kind of, adds to that authenticity of the scene that you're trying to portray.
So it's like, and even just the tiniest things that you may not necessarily think about, but even something as small as haircuts at the time, like the idea of standardized military haircuts, as we know today, were not necessarily a thing as you would have in World War II. You'd probably see something more like a curtain cut or more like either like short curls or just kind of like a close trim. You wouldn't have necessarily something like a high and tight or even like a shaved head. But just that focus on that level of detail and that level of research will do a lot as far as giving your audience the feel you need to have them buy in to then accept whatever you need to sell them.
Yeah, I think that, if you get an artist, just assign, you just go and assign an artist to do it and they're like, oh, I'll give a shot at it. Are you really giving justice to the medium that you're trying to do?
Right.
When, that's one of the things that I know I was watching and that, a lot of people like Rob Davis will go through and really try and, pull reference, for, the time periods and stuff like that when he does his things so that he can get that right and all that. So there's some good stuff there.
Yeah. They kind of moving specifically into the colors in war comics. Obviously, you have the specific colors, like things you might see, like patterns of camouflage or how things were painted at a time. But when you're dealing with the usually emotionally charged scenes that are portrayed in war stories, we were kind of talking about how colors can do a lot to convey emotion in a comic. There are a bunch of ways you can do about it, but what are some of your thoughts on using correct color coding in a comic that isn't necessarily just providing the accuracy, but also providing the emotion for the scene?
Oh, definitely. I would set a lot of the, like I said, I haven't really done that, per se, because there wasn't a lot of the war comics at the time. And nowadays it's like, a lot of the modern war comics, like, just a whole different feel. So what I would the way that I would approach it is, I would tend to keep, like I said, for the main crux of the book, the drabs, the things. But when you start going into, the all hell breaks loose, I would visualize throwing in, a lot of yellow for, for bullet blast firing, more than just that 2-2-2 type thing. It's kind of, throw it out there for the chaotic, you don't know where things are going, people are shooting from you from all different areas. So essentially your whole area is going to be lit up with, like oranges and yellows and all that. And then if I was going through and doing something like, like a kill box type thing, or that I may introduce something like a lot of dark reds, or reds to show the whole concept of death and things like that. So I would strike the muted thing with the in-your-face colors to offset and show your action sequences where to push that even more. So
Yeah, but again, I'm gonna pop something up here just to kind of illustrate that point. But I don't know why I didn't think about this at the start of the show. But one of my favorite, like war comics or like military things, is actually it's a modern story. But the way they handle coloring and line work, I feel like there's a lot to convey, sort of the chaos and emotion that would be expected. There you go. Let me get this popped up. It's called Black Powder Red Earth. But this is actually taken from panels inside the comic. But the way you'd have kind of the muted, more realistic tones and working on the actual characters, and then a highly expressive color work on the background.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's gorgeous.
I strongly recommend our good. If you enjoy a good war story, I recommend to read. They're very compelling. All right, we'll get back to showing Javier's Archer.
Well, the other thing is stepping into the drawing and penciling. I think you've got a visual medium, and why I kind of separated a lot of the more modern stuff from traditional. It's like you want to show a lot of I don't want to make it look pretty shiny, the latest tech. You want that to shine and all that stuff. But then when you go through and you start doing the action, in addition to whatever colors you're on, a lot of times the thing that steps in is getting your almost sketch styles. If you kind of think of what is it? Mark Teixeira with his Ghost Rider, that very scratchy, art that's not clean. It very well lends itself with a lot of the action. So you can offset, bring that emotion in with, a lot of, sketch, adds to the confusion and adds to the feeling of the the whatever scene you're trying to play when all hell breaks loose. So there's some back and forth thing on that, and I can appreciate some different styles as you're going through between this is your latest tech, and this is a very controlled environment where things are crisp and clean, and then you're just in a who knows what. You're just trying to survive the experience. So I think in a lot of that jumbled, sketchy type of work, I think plays into it, in addition to, the writing and the colors and stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I bring it every now and then, but when you get to fictionalized war stories, I feel like, even though it is highly fictionalized and very out of the surreal, but I think you always have to mention Metal Gear Solid and Hideo Kojima as far as writing a story that is actively about kind of the mistreatment of soldiers in modern society. But the comic adaptation of Metal Gear Solid 1 and 2 and the line work there is very much just like almost like sketch lines. They don't like it does not look like they did actual finish lines or inks. It kind of looks like they just get sketch lines and then colored on top of that for most of the book, except for a few moments where they have like a moment of like crystal clarity in the story. But there is a very strong correlation between the way that things are drawn and the way that the world around you is supposed to be perceived in the story.
Yep, I agree.
Also, kind of David's point there. We're going to get a little PG-13 with our phrasing here, but I feel like war comics are also a place for people who are just into gear porn, like just showing off as many gadgets and tools as you want. And certainly there's a place for that. It can't necessarily be the dominating force behind the story, but it gets to move into more of the writing elements of making a war comic. But I will say that I think one of the core narrative elements that helps define the war comic or war story genre is equipment and gadgets and tools. Both in that it helps set the time frame, like is this like past, present, futuristic, like where exactly are we in the timeline? But also, it's something that is so out of the normal realm for average civilian life that it is an immediate point of interest. Like it adds immediate cool factor that immediately draws somebody into it. And then you fall into, well, now you need to like Chekhov's gun that. Like if you're making a big point about someone's true vision nods or something like that, like you need to like have a point of where a condition where you make it important to the story that these are more effective than the typical night vision goggles that someone else would have. So making sure that your time spent in gadget porn serves the story.
One of the things that that I kind of think of, it wasn't the greatest movie. It was entertaining, but one of the things that was nice, that I think had a nice representation of this, is the movie Battleship.
Yeah,
where you started out and here's all the latest technology, and here's the aliens who are super technology, but then in towards kind of towards the end, you get the shift, and you get the take back to your classic military weapons that they have, what was on the ship, your big guns, focusing how the big guns work, and I think that movie had a good play on it, where it put the emphasis of, you boys can have the latest thing, but there's nothing that turns around and beats this this huge manual throw it on your shoulder, load the barrel thing, that gave a good feel for the original technology. So to your point, what you're talking about, when you're designing your comic, it's like when you're dealing with something that's more modern missions and all that, you will want to go through and emphasize oh, this is the coolest thing. You may drop maybe it's somebody who's maybe the writer or the artist is somebody who's really into this and maybe goes to some shows and knows, hey, here's the latest and the greatest that's out, and maybe sneaking either a reference to that in or whatever is really gonna kind of tickle the fancy of the people that are on the newest and latest and all this. But then when you flip the switch and you go back to your 1940s and whatever, getting there and really pulling, your references and referencing, the things of, what was out at that time, will really go and kind of tickle the fancy of the people that are the historians that want to know all this. So there's some good directions, depending on which way you go, some really cool stuff to go, in one direction or the other.
I think when I was writing Wolf Hunter, it opens up with a fictionalized account of an actual battle that happens over southeast England during the Blitz. And we draw into account that it's Messerschmitts versus Hurricanes, and like there's technical differences between the two. and especially since the Hurricane itself was kind of like a monster truck of a fighter with how many guns were loaded onto that thing, but also then you had to account for different things with like the turning radius. And so these differences in the way they're engineered is something that a good fighter commander would know, like a good wing commander would know at the time. So that plays into account of his decision making. So when you're telling a visual story where you can also in a medium where people are used to thought bubbles, and you're doing, I like doing thought captions because they just look clean. But in some of those captions where you kind of work through the visuals with the audience, that way they get a very clear image of like how the history and like the real life engineering of that history affected decision making going into the narrative you're about to tell.
Yeah. You kind of think of the people that, they're people that are steering the ship that know that they can only make this turn and, dropping anchor or whatever to force it, those military tactics that they kind of go around and break the rules, I think add a lot of interest to it as well.
Definitely. Say stepping into some thoughts on theme considerations with war comics. Obviously, war itself can be a very heavy subject, and I think for that reason, most stories you see that deal with that subject are usually heavy or darker or grittier stories. Think of movies like Black Hawk Down. That's kind of like Saving Private Ryan and Black Hawk Down is kind of the mental perception that we have in the United States of a good war story. However, if you can do it well, you can do, I can't recall it lighthearted, but I can still say a more comedic take on everything. If you think of something like MASH, where MASH was still comedic, but still had very heavy moments. And usually, like I said, it's kind of moments where they'll draw attention to parts of the war that people agree or have views on, say like this is something that was perhaps like not the best decision made by people in power, but these are still people in a bad situation that need to be thought about and have empathy for. So I guess before I get into my MFA hat diatribe, I'll ask David and Javier, what are some of your thoughts on the theming and sort of tone of war stories that you have consumed, that you have really connected with or resonated with? And what are some of your thoughts a little more critically on sort of themes and tone of it all?
Well, I would say the one that stands out in my memory was the movie Heavy Metal. There's one of the animations there, one of the stories takes place on, I think, in a war fortress, and there's like undead zombies fighting each other in the air, and then they both crash and they rush at each other and stuff. That was really something that really shook me. So since then, it's always been, if it's a war comic that includes horror, that's my deal. I'm totally okay with that. That's where you can include the occult and demonic forces and good versus evil and undead and stuff in the trappings of war. How it's horrible for everybody. Yeah, that's my jam.
Well, I have to say, for me, there's if done right, you can really introduce a lot of a lot of crazy themes, like the dealings with World War II or whatever, and then incorporating zombies and all that. If it's done well and it's done right, you can really kind of take your obviously it's not real, but you can take it and have fun with it. But one of the movies that stands out for me, a war movie, was Hacksaw Ridge. thoroughly enjoyed that. That was your, you had the whole thing, with the war and how bad it was, but just the idea of take on the guy that's the pacifist that doesn't want to do that, who actually ends up being one of the biggest heroes. He did what he set out to do, which was to save so many lives, and that is, I think, was a fantastic take on a war story, with heart and with determinations. So that was a big one for me that I really found interesting.
Definitely. Yeah. For me, I always kind of go to. I guess also to Javi's point, I feel like I have to shout out Wolfenstein as well as Operation Overlord. Fantastic zombie movie set in World War II. There's also a tabletop miniature game called Conflict 47, which is essentially based on the idea that the Germans' Wonder Weapon program paid off, and at the same time, some scientists affected, and Tesla ended up creating an infinite power energy, which the English were able to unlock around that World War II. Russians, like werebears, became a thing. So it ends up becoming a game of like British robots versus German vampires and werewolves, Russian werebears and giant spider tanks. Americans did have the things like Ford Model X, which is a giant walking tank.
Wow.
It's very, very fun aesthetic, very silly. But I think similarly to David, the war stories that like resonate with me are usually about the individuals who usually end up making the choice to do so much for others without necessarily considering themselves. Kind of going back to Saving Private Ryan, but also what I think that was a really interesting one is Fury, which is a movie about a tank crew, which those guys are kind of fairly selfish and kind of like self-focused on the moment, because like they're in war, they're there to survive and get out, and like the tank and the crew is what matters, and they're gonna make sure they get out. However, spoiler warning, and they get to the end of the movie, they're broken down, and they're the only obstacle between a SS patrol and a unprotected column of infantry. So they make the decision to stay and halt the column to give the column and halt the division, so then the column has time to get out of danger. Things like that. I didn't necessarily go that deep with Wolf Hunter, but I still wanted to touch on another subject, which was the idea of purpose as well as PTSD, kind of based on real life conversations I've had with people and things like that. Usually there's some guys who have come from the service heavily injured or with mental scarring that have seemed to have lost their sense of purpose. And part of that is the post-traumatic stress of taking on, heavy tasks or things that'll stir that up. Will kind of put them in a position where they're not in the best place to act in their own interest. And so they can't really find a new purpose. They're unable to seek one out because they're stuck in a point where they feel like their brain is actively self-sabotaging them. Wolfhunter, of course, Willard is in a position where he is not able to return to civilian life. He is thrown back into it and is, but in a different capacity, and now has to kind of push past his mental scarring as well as his own self-doubt to create a new sense of purpose and a new goal for himself and where he's at. I find it especially with war comics, because war comics have such a visual spectacle to them, and war stories in general, where you really have to do a lot of focus to make sure your theming and your storytelling is consistent and impactful throughout the story. Because if you get to a point where it's just gunfight to gunfight to gunfight without a through line, or if you get to a point where it's all visual spectacles, you end up getting, the Fast and Furious movies where there's a light narrative around it. But you're just there to watch the action. You're not there to really take in, the moments of character change. And I mean, their movies are successful for a reason. There's eyes for that. So if you just want to tell a story that is about, things going boom, more power to you. But if you want to tell a story that has moments of character change, but still makes full use of the war comic landscape, making use of battle sequences and moments of gadget showcasing, tool showcasing, you really have to have a consistent focus throughout of how is this, your core theming, your core character change, how is that impacting your characters throughout this action sequence, throughout this development. And that's kind of the main consideration that I left Wolfhunter with, is understanding, having a better understanding of how to just always have my character's development in mind almost in every scene, regardless of if it's a set piece or action showcase or whatever the scene is.
It just dawned on me, Robotech is a war story too.
Yeah, absolutely. As I said, I really believe that science fiction war stories are just as important. I love Gundam, Robotech, and the way those stories deal with war and its consequences is fantastic.
Yeah, and you can even tell a love story in that, or social commentary too. And it's. I would say it's a vehicle to tell the kind of stories that you want to tell. A genre, I guess, would be accurate. But what's the appeal of? I mean, as a creator, why would you go war stories?
I think for a couple of reasons. One, there is kind of in general the cool factor of gadgets, things blowing up, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
but and Roland also mentioned Battletech, which is very much in the giant stuffy robots category of war stories. Speaking of Battletech, they have Timberwolf I painted up here. Yeah, and much of it is kind of as well said, World War II in space. There's actually a new MechWarriors video game series set in Battletech, and the new MechWarrior game that's coming out, they described it as All Quiet on the Western Front in space. That's kind of what they want to do with the story. The main reason why I find compelled to write war stories, besides the cool factor, is it's such a compelling catalyst for those stories that involve the choice to make a heroic sacrifice. So if you're wanting to make a character where that their growth, their story, their series ends with them making that choice, that's the reason why the Odyssey is a war story, is because they could have Homework could have written that as a story of just fishermen going around, but it made more sense to have it be the Keen of Ithaca coming back from the Trojan War. That development just made more sense. The other things that is the ability to have, like you said, Javier, potent social commentary, because for the most part, everyone has the general consensus that war is bad. Anything that leads to the mass loss of life is usually bad. You can, fighting the defensive war is good and honorable because you're fighting for your family and for your homeland, but ideally you shouldn't need to fight that in the first place. I mean, to kind of pull from Robotech and Battletech and Gundam and all that, I immediately kind of think of Gundam Iron Blooded Orphans, which is a very interesting take. When you look at that in the context of kind of where Africa and the Middle East are, it's a story about a group of
Children, basically.
child soldiers on a desert planet that's being exploited for its resources, that are then essentially bought and bidded for by professional armies, and then eventually decide to rebel and bring their representative to what essentially is the space UN. But of course, the people who are profiting from the exploitation of that planet do everything in their power to stop that. So you have this, very potent story of talking about propaganda. Like, of course, the winning side, the profiting side, is going to do everything in their power to tell you, like, no, these are bad people. Like, we need to be there, as well as children making decisions they shouldn't have to, which unfortunately is a reality that you see in a lot of underdeveloped countries around the world. Understanding of resource-focused exploitation, things like that. It's kind of like a feral to arms with giant fighting robots. Was the last season there. It's a really interesting way to tell a potent story about children being forced into hard decisions, making decisions they shouldn't have to in a terrible situation, because people in power decided to that their bottom line was more important than what was happening to the people that were residing there. All told through the lens of a war story featuring giant fighting robots in space.
Well, I mean, and we've been exposed as a culture.
Yeah.
War stories have always been. I mean, like you mentioned, Odysseus. I mean, a lot of literature. I mean, what is it?
Yeah.
The Art of War.
Mm-hmm.
Things like that have. I don't want to say broken down what war is, but it's a way for us who have never experienced it to even get an inkling of what it is to make the decisions to survive, to make the decision, what mentally happens, what are the sacrifices, what are the price you pay as a society when all these individuals that went off to war for 5, 10, 15 years as centurions used to, and they come back and they can't integrate back into society. Who's responsible for that? I mean, the state put them there, the country put them there, and you get that sense of responsibility, but also as a society, sometimes they're ostracized. It's I don't want to say it's nothing new, because I mean, we've been killing each other as long as we've been on this planet.
Yeah.
But it should never go out of style.
Yeah,
those are things we cannot forget.
It's a problem we should always be trying to solve, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you had mentioned the last centurion there, but yeah, I mean, Rome was kind of thinking, well, like, just from like a historical context, because Rome is for those of you who don't know, at some point in my life, I've also did historical studies, and Rome I've written several papers on, as well as the fall of the Byzantine Empire. But Rome as a nation was very interesting because at the time they, you think, coming up from like the Greeks and Spartan warriors and like warrior culture and like the idea like you should be like strong and proud and like be a fighter for like your kingdom, but for your empire. But Rome very much was of the idea that you do soldiering because you have to, but your end goal is to be a farmer. Like they had a whole system on after so many years served in the Legion, you'd be granted citizenship and a plot of land to do farming. And then there's also a whole things about Agrippa the Greater wanting to expand that program and make it more accessible and pull away some of the properties from the Senate. The Senate not liking that, ended up getting him assassinated, but then you end up getting these myths and stuff wrote out later down the line about kind of expressing that anger against the Senate. You end up getting a lot of stories that feature, terrible politicians and the lone soldier, the last centurion stand watching the wall while the Senate feasts. Like that kind of thing is that people have always been dealing with the issues of like, you soldier for so long, you do these terrible things, and then you feel like you get forgotten when you come back. So you end up having to resort to telling a story about it in order to get people to even pay attention to you. And it kind of it is that thing where it helps bring that into focus for the greater public, where an issue that they can't, where David and I have no idea what it means to be a child soldier in Africa fighting because oil companies are trying to raid your mountains, but you watch Iron Blooded Orphans and you can kind of see like, oh, these are what these children are doing. These are like the sacrifices they're making. This, like, he just watched his friend get crushed by a tank. And kind of help get you, even though it is a fictionalized telling, a better understanding of some of the darker realities that are out there.
Exactly.
And then you get things like the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, which are just wild and don't really make any sense. And there doesn't really seem to be a purpose other than just some guy wanted to make his three brothers sound cooler than they actually were. For those of you who've read the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, that's a wild book. It does not age well. Okay. Do we have... we are past an hour here, coming up on our time, and Javier has been working on Megatron, of course, the Transformer who transforms into a tank with our blasting arm.
Well, that looks more like the classic transforms into the handgun.
That's also true.
Yeah, it is the classic one. I mean, that's the one I'm familiar with that I can draw with, without too much reference. But yeah, just to show I'm not a faker.
There you go.
Yeah, that's.
As we've said on episodes before, it's always beneficial to draw from reference.
Exactly. All right, so yeah, that's our 1 hour drawing. Let me clean it up a bit so everybody can see it, and let me see how I can post this. There you go. All right.
Oh, that's why. There you go. There you go. Yeah. Fantastic. That's really clean work.
Yeah, that didn't exist an hour ago. There you go.
Yeah. And we didn't enter a prompt or anything to do that. It was just put pencil to paper.
The life of an artist. What can I say?
Yeah. Okay. Do we have any closing thoughts or anything you guys want to talk about on War Comics before we end tonight's show?
No, not really on my end. I think we covered a lot.
Thoughts on War Comics? I used to buy Jademan comics, and they were all kung fu stories.
Okay.
And I'm guessing, because this genre of comics, at least the ones I've been exposed to, I never bought Westerns or romance. That was well before my time. Sure. But war comics are all, like you said, explosions and shootings and violence. And, it is a power fantasy. Superheroes are power fantasies, but then war stories are so much more closer to home.
Yeah,
that they're a little harder to stomach for me, because they, like, I'm reading Sergeant Rock, and these guys seem real to me. Dozer and Ice Cream and the Boxer and everybody else. I mean, it reaches me in a different way that superheroes just can't. They can't compare, because Super is above, and I'm just a regular Joe. And War Comics show nothing but regular Joes doing what seems impossible and unreasonable, and just doing what I know that in my regular day I just can't do. So of course my hat and honor to all those who served, of course.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is also one of those things where, particularly Black Matter, Red Earth, it really deglorifies. Most recently, it deglorifies the war on terror. It shows like this is kind of thing where like we were told to be here, we have really no reason to be here, but we're fighting for our lives, and I'm trying to get out. And for a lot of people that have served, like Brendan Garrett, when I talk about this, see, like that's what he wants to see in the story. Is not something that seems like it's trying to get people to enlist, but something that shows like what he went through. That he gets dropped somewhere in Afghanistan with his team, and they're told, "All right, go kill this guy." And you're like, all right, this is some guy we don't know, but that's what we're told to do. And now we're in the thick of it, and we're trying to fight our way back out. And it's not glorious. It's not fun. It is just us relying on adrenaline, trying to do more than we can because this is now a life or death situation. And so having a good story that can like capture the reality and just shows regular Joes in a bad situation, it is good. It is tough. It's hard to read for a lot of people, but I think also for people who have lived through that, then it becomes a moment of feeling like, I mean, we've talked about this a little bit. Maybe we should do another story about like the importance of representation. But for them, it is that moment of representation where they feel like their story has been seen and is actually being heard by people.
Yeah, and a lot of people never pay the price for their words.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I guess I'm going to get a little political here, but politicians really need to understand that when they commit us, they're committing our bodies, the bodies of our brothers and sisters and uncles and cousins.
Yeah.
Sacrifice whatever it takes for peace. I mean, if you got to go to war, you got to go to war. I mean, I would never pick that. But they should know better.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's all I ask. I ask for them to be better than to be sending our kids.
Yeah.
But we all do what we must.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is that our system is set up and that it's usually always the kids that can't afford to go to college.
Yeah, they're not sending me. What am I going to do? I can't.
Yeah.
I can barely walk. I'm not going to be able to help anybody.
Yeah.
I can drive. Maybe I can drive, but that's it. It's the younger people that's always pays for that. So.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, I feel like we can't really end on a note more potent than that. So this has been That Silverline Show on Tuesday.
Do you want to mention the Fund My Comic that's going on before we go?
I mean, probably should, but it feels a little.
We can end it on a positive.
Yeah.
Hey, so who's got a Kickstarter going? What's going on?
Yeah. We do have Fund My Comic going on. I'm currently trying to load it, but so I can showcase it. Let's see here. God, it's not the same thing, but I just kind of got whiplash too. I don't know if anyone remembers. For those of you like me, where you're on the younger side, you're in school, and they forced you to watch 9/11 on public television. It's a really weird choice. So I forget why they did that, but I can't remember which network it was. I can't remember it was one of the bigger ones. It was either at the time, which would have been either CNN or ABC. Their network controller was already automated by that point, so they couldn't turn it off because everyone was glued to the TV to like turn off their automated network controller. They whereas some other stations had that as a manual switch to commercial back and forth. So right as you're watching the tower, it then cuts to Arby's.
Oh,
wow. $3.99. And I was like, what's happening?
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, that's very unusual.
It was I'm pretty sure you can still find that clip on YouTube.
Well, I mean, I remember being in what, middle school, middle school, when Challenger, they were showing off, how NASA was sending rockets out to space
Yeah.
until, that tragic,
And
explosion happens.
boom,
Like,
yeah.
you guys probably don't want to be showing every child in America, something so risky as a rocket launch with 6 people on it.
Right. I mean,
Just saying.
Yeah. Okay. So for those of you who were here last week, you do know that we're at the launch party for Divinity number 4. And if you go to Fund My Comic, we are on the front page, so you don't even need to search us up. You can just go to the front page for the first comic listed. We currently have 19 backers. We have raised 54% of our goal in 7 days. There's still 21 days left to go, so this goes until August 7th at 9 p.m. There is a very dope holographic cover that you can pick up, or I guess not holographic, but foil. We call it holographic because Pokemon cards. But yeah, really dope foil cover. So if you have been following Divinity, or if you just want to get in, and now is a great time to buy. We do have several catch-up options listed if you want to read it physically, digitally, whatever suits your fancy. You can also add on other issues for other stories. We've been talking about a lot tonight. Maybe Wolf Hunter number 1 catches your fancy. But yeah, this is a similar. It's not quite a war story, but it is a conspiracy story. Calls young Divinity, a girl who develops the power to heal anyone miraculously with her touch. And after her parents die, her stepbrother Zach is put on a discharge from the Marines to take care of his family. And in doing so, they find themselves in the sights of organizations that look to profit off and manipulate her skills for their own gains.
Kind of similar to the whole, iron-blooded orphans, right? People that are looking to profit from, other people's, either their benefits or, in the case of the orphans, their misery.
Yeah.
But it's people just trying to profit off of other people taking advantage of them. So it follows along the theme.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess one of the other things here, like Javier said, is a power fantasy. And one of the things is we always hope that we'd be, in a situation like this, we'd be Zach, we'd be I can't remember his name, but the mafia guy who helps out the kids. But we'd be like people who didn't make the decision to do what is best for the weakest party involved and not seek to profit from ourselves. All right. Well, thanks for joining us, Timescales. We're actually about to head off. You got the tail end of our show. But yeah, so head on over to Fund My Comic and pre-order yourself a copy of Divinity number 4. Like we've said before, all of our fundings are already completed stories. You're not backing some comic that's not going to get made. It'll never get delivered. As we've seen some people do in the same space. You're just ordering something in a way that makes our ability to print it and ship it to you that much quicker. Yeah. We'll be back next week where we will be talking about combining genres. So this is for people who like a little bit of Western in their superhero or a little bit of horror in the war story or things like that.
Jonah Hex, he ended up going from being a Western to being in the far future in a nuclear wasteland.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And a whole lot of great things. And, we'll probably talk about whatever the Hex saga is, because that is just... Someone saw the word genre, said yes, and then made a comic. But we'll be back next week for that. Make sure to check out Wednesday Wham and Silver Sunday, 8 p.m. Eastern on those specific days. But we'll be back 8 p.m. Pacific time next week. Until then, make mine
Silverline.
Make my
Hey,
table.
I'm G-Rod. Make mine Silverline.